what happens is that players and coaches, general managers, all these people, they put doubt in your mind. They always put self-doubt in your mind. And you have to fight that all the time. And it doesn't matter what year you're in, that self-doubt can creep in. The way you push it out is by, number one, knowing your rules, knowing your craft, but also watching a lot of film. And if you don't continue to watch film to see how good you are, how, maybe not too good you are in certain games, then the self-doubt's going to creep in. During the course of the game, players are always questioning you. Now it's even more because it's the challenge, right? They twirl the finger, coaches challenge, and so on. I think that coaches are finally realizing the credibility of players is really low. There's no doubt about it. The main man, of course, and Dana knows this, and then you probably do too, is Joe Crawford, who I knew I wouldn't have the success in my career if it wasn't for him. And to me, personally, I just think he is the greatest basketball official of all time that ever put on a jersey. And I truly believe he's forgotten more about officiating than most people know in their lifetime. The man is just amazing. And we would have so many wonderful conversations after games. When I was first hired, there was only 2 referees on the floor. So Joe and I would travel together and so on for like 2 years. He was my primary crew chief. And I was so lucky to have him as that primary crew chief and mentor. And Joe never pulled punches, as you guys know. There are times I walk in the locker room and I go like, well, I really wasn't too good there tonight. And he goes, well, at least you know you weren't. No, it wasn't like patting on the back. No, that's okay, Steve. No. But if you think about what he said, that was a learning moment there. If you have a bad game and you don't know you referee poorly, you're in a heap of trouble. You really are. You have to know when you're good and when you're not good. Being objective, you to elevate your game, as we talked about before. I think being objective, you have to be able to elevate your game that way. Control the things that you can control. So I think we talked about that, a little bit there about elevating your thing. It's about not guessing. Nate, we talked about that. So I think for officiating, to elevate that, and also I think to elevate yourself within your community, officiating community, is not just to look out for yourself, but look out for your partners on the floor. Not everybody needs to know that you're the crew chief on the floor.
And now, episode 27, letter Y, you. Join hosts Dana Pappas and Nate Acosta with special guest and my BFF, Steve Javie, on the From A to Zebra podcast.
Welcome back to the From A to Zebra podcast. I'm Dana Pappas here with my co-host Nate Acosta. As we get to the end of the alphabet for our first season, I am both thrilled at how season 1 has turned out and really excited about season 2.
Before we move on to season 2, we just have a couple letters left, and today's episode is focusing on the letter Y, and that word is you. We talk about the importance of each individual official and their role in their own growth and finding their place in the world of officiating. That means each and every single one of you.
Today's guest is a retired NBA referee who worked in the league from 1986-87 to 2010-11. He officiated 1,514 regular season games, 243 playoff games, and 23 NBA Finals games for a staggering total of 1,780 games. He has served as a basketball rules analyst with ESPN and is now a deacon in the Catholic Church. Mr. Steve Javie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Dana. Thanks, Nate. It's great to be here with you guys as always.
Great to see you,
Yeah,
and thank you again for doing this.
Absolutely, Steve, it's great to see you. And before we get started on today's topic, can you just tell us a little bit about your officiating journey, how you got started, if you only worked as a basketball referee, and where the road took you in officiating?
Yeah, Nate. I never really thought of making officiating a career. I always wanted to be a Major League Baseball player. And I played a little bit in college, and actually in the minor leagues for about a year and a half or so. But all during college, I started getting into basketball officiating. And the reason being is that the intramural program at Temple University, where I went in Philadelphia, the program needed basketball officials for the intramural program. And I think they were paying something like $10 a game at the time. And I figured, you know what? That would be my spending money for the weekend. So I got into officiating that way. I was about 19 or 20 years old. Kind of liked it. Didn't know much about it, but I just did it to make a few extra dollars. Not even thinking of obviously going down the road making a career out of it. So I started that way, and then once my career of baseball kind of fizzled as a player, I had to really take a step back and look at what I wanted to do with my life. And, obviously sports is in my background and I have a passion for sports and I wanted to see, hey, what can I do with this? I'm not playing anymore. I was never a coach. You know what? Let me give officiating a little try here. But here's the weird thing. Even though I started officiating basketball in college, my first love being baseball, I decided to give a try with minor league baseball. I went away to actually the umpire school for the major leagues, and that was back in '79. And went down there and got chosen to be one of the guys to work in the minor leagues that year. Put about 2.5 years in, Nate, in the Florida State League and the minor leagues. And all the while I was umpiring baseball in the summer, we referee basketball in the winter back at home, high school basketball and so on. And then had some part-time gigs in between. So that's how I got started. Now, baseball, when I started umpiring, I enjoyed it, but I never really enjoyed as much as basketball. To me, basketball is a more challenging sport, quicker. Obviously, somebody once told me, never officiate a sport that doesn't have a clock. And it's so true. Because baseball, you could be out there for 3-4 hours. And where I live here in the Philadelphia area, it could be cold as all get out in March and April. Basketball, high school basketball game, you're done in about an hour, short sleeve shirt, 72 degrees. You make the choice. But actually, no, I love baseball, playing more than umpiring. And I just decided that basketball was a lot more challenging for me and decided after I quit umpiring in the minor leagues to put all my eggs in one basket and pursue a career in basketball.
Well, Steve, yeah, you answered that question. I was going to ask you if you had a favorite of the two. And it's funny because I think I remember you talking about officiating indoor sports only and sports with a clock. And I use that line all the time when people ask me why I don't officiate any of the sport, especially outside.
Right.
I mean, you get that. I mean, today in Indiana, it's like 30 degrees. So I don't know who would want to work baseball today. It's a little chilly out there. So,
and in New Mexico, we're suffering the windy season. A couple haboob situations happening around here.
Fun time.
Well, I'll give you a little story of my last game I ever umpired. When I quit minor league baseball, I came back home to Philadelphia. It was still like around the mid to late summer. I called the gentleman who was assigning college baseball in the fall. And I said, look, I'm home. I'd like to, work in your leagues and so on and so forth. And of course, all the experience I had behind the plate at the minor leagues, he gave me like 20 games in the fall, all behind home plate. Well, my first game I get behind home plate, the temperature is about 42 degrees. The game lasted about 3.5 hours. It was, I think the final score might have been like 14-13. Each team had about 10 errors. Obviously, after the game, I took my equipment off, called the guy and said, you can take the rest of the games back. I'm done umpiring.
Absolutely.
I want climate controlled and a clock at all costs. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, no doubt about that.
That's a great story. And I'm sure it resonates with a lot of people listening because you're not the first person I've heard that from. So, Steve, kind of coming from an officiating family with your dad having worked in the NFL and then your godfather working in the MLB, how important was having that built-in support of people who really do get it as you progress through your career?
Yeah, that's a great question, Dana. And first of all, I'd like to digress a little bit. Growing up, it was the coolest thing growing up because I would go with my dad to different football games. My godfather would always come over the house and bring these white American League baseballs for my birthday and for Christmas. And it was so cool. Not even thinking about officiating, but just listening to them. And they were like best buddies. They would tell stories and I would be there with my friends listening to them. But I think because of the fact that they reached the big time and my father officiating in 4 Super Bowls and my godfather umpired in 4 World Series. I mean, they were used to professional officiating. So when I was pursuing and then got hired by the NBA, who was officiating there, it wasn't like they were like, oh, this is great. No, they were happy for me. But since they were at the top of their careers before, they actually knew what it took to get there. They weren't, and I can't blame fathers for being happy for their sons, bragging about, hey, my son's an NBA referee. And my dad had nothing to do with that. I remember when I got hired, my dad said, now the work begins. He said, now the work begins. It's not, you can't just say, oh, I got hired. That's great. Here we go. And he actually could take me through the process of what's going to happen, being, a rookie in your first year, the first few years in the league. So I was fortunate to have 2 people like that who just weren't my cheerleaders, but they were also like my mentors too, that would help me through the process and get through officiating in my first few years.
You brought up the fact that your dad mentioned now the work begins, and that kind of leads into our letter Y in you, right? As officials, we're accountable to not only our associations, our coordinators and supervisors, our assigners, governing bodies, the student athletes, the athletes. How do we, how did you go about holding yourself accountable in your journey?
Well, I think it's really important holding yourself accountable, because I truly believe that if you hold yourself accountable to the highest level, all the other people that you're accountable to, it just falls right in line. So as long as you don't cheat yourself, as long as you don't try to fake it, your accountability of a number of things. Number one, preparation, physically and mentally preparation. I know in the NBA, obviously we have a set of mechanics. College has sets of mechanics. Knowing your mechanics inside and out, knowing your rules inside and out. That's how my dad used to always hold me accountable, because I remember when my dad was officiating in the NFL during the season, after dinner every night, he had his rule books underneath his chair in the living room. He had this recliner, and after he'd have dinner, he'd come in there, sit down, and he'd grab his rule books out. And for at least a half hour every night, go over the rule books, an hour every night. And he'd always preach to me, son, know your rules like nobody on the court knows them. He said, that's how you prepare for games, and that's why you won't be surprised. That's part of holding yourself accountable. Also, holding yourself accountable, too, is the physical condition that you're in. I mean, that's to me, that's so big. You have guys go out there, and I still talk to high school associations officials, too, and I sit there and say, well, if you go out there and you're 40 pounds overweight, what are they going to think right away? You have to hold yourself accountable for your physical, in the look of physical. That'd be good. As I said, I can always start over. How you look physically, but also, along with knowing your rules, knowing the mechanics and so on. So I think if you hold yourself more accountable than anybody else, then everything else does fall in line. Then you know what? Then your supervisor's happy with you. The coach is not always happy with you, but at the same time, you know your rules, you look good. That's half the battle right there, Nate.
Awesome. And it's so true. And for our listeners, I mean, we're on with Steve, and I think that most people would say that you are one of the greatest of all time in the sport of basketball. And so for our listeners, Steve's not the first person to tell you this. Steve's, your coordinators, your signers, your peers, your mentors have all told you these things, and so keep holding yourself accountable, keep doing the things that you have to do, because, like I said, one of the greatest here telling you.
First of all, thank you for the kind words, Nate. That's very nice of you. But I always like to say I've never had an original thought, because the fact is all the people that I took from and I learned from, and that's how I developed my philosophy and so on. But when it comes down to it, Nate, it's really the little things. There's nothing, it's not this great big thing that you have to do. If you do all the little things correctly, and even when you're on the floor, you come into habits. You create habits of doing the little things right that probably you won't need for 99 times out of 100. But that 100th time, since you've created these good habits on the floor, bang, you're not surprised. So if you just concentrate on the little things that you can control, it makes it a very successful career.
Boy, that sounds really familiar. I receive a phone call from one of my coordinators at least once a week, and you may have worked with her a time or two, Violet Palmer, but she talks about fundamentals and sticking to the basics. And because what's going to happen is you're going to get in that situation where the game gets tight, and you're going to revert back to your training. You're going to revert back to your fundamentals. And if your fundamentals aren't sound and you don't have a strong foundation, you're going to revert and start doing some crazy things out there. So all year long, she really works on with the entire staff on just being fundamentally sound, sticking to the mechanics, and sticking to the rules.
Nate, I'll give you a little story, something very, very simple that goes right in line with this. And of course, at my age, I can go off on tangents here. And I think I'm allowed to at my age.
We love the tangents. The tangents are the best part.
But I still remember, and this is what preseason is for also, because you're off, like for the NBA, we're off a few months, and then now preseason games, to get your mind, try to get your mind back into things. I still remember, it's funny how certain situations you remember. I was in New Orleans in a preseason game, and I'm the slot official or seat official in college, and I'm going, flat on the foul line. And a basket was just made, so I was going from one foul line to the next foul line, and all of a sudden I heard the whistle blow. And I have no idea just what happened. And the reason why is because I turned my head, and just ran down the floor without any purpose of looking behind me, of knowing what was going on. And I sat there, I stood there, I'm like, son of a gun. And this is probably in my 20th year. And it's just that sometimes if we don't get into our habits early in preseason, we can fall out of them. And I remember from that game on, the rest of the year, when I'm going from foul line to foul line, I'm taking that look over my shoulder because in this situation, the whistle blew. I couldn't have helped my partner a little bit. And I felt so bad. Luckily, I caught it. And that's one thing I do. When I watch games like for ESPN and ABC, I watch where officials are running from, foul line to foul line. Are they taking a glance over their shoulder, where they're looking and so on? But that's really important. And that's just these little fundamentals that'll help you in that 1 out of 100 times that you can say to your partner, I had this also, and I can help you out.
Great lessons. I feel like your last answers, Steve, have been little mini clinics. So I hope that people are really listening to this because there's been a lot packed into these answers. And you kind of started down this road a little bit in one of your previous answers, but we're going to go full blown now. We often talk, Nate and I, on this show about the importance of mentorship. And we would love to hear from you about your officiating mentors and specifically, what did they tell you about your own personal role as a part of the officiating family or the officiating community?
Yeah, that before I even answer that one, I want to get into not just the mentorship, but the menteeship. And I think that's very, very important because what I hear out here nowadays change. Okay, things change, mindsets change of officials, mindsets change of just the microcosm of society, of kids in high school and college and so on, of thinking they know a lot of things. In order to be a good mentor, you have to have a person who's a good mentee, a person who wants to extract what you have to offer from this veteran who has a lot to give you and who wants to give it to you. And you have to be able to take it as constructive criticism and then maybe try to put it to practical use. I know that, and then getting into mentors, my biggest mentor, obviously my father. When I would come home on road trips, because my first 5 years in the league, I was single. And I would come home from a road trip and stop by his house with my dad, and we would sit and talk. And most likely in my first 5 years, once in a while I'd lose my temper. I might be on the highlights on ESPN, throwing this person out and that person out, and how many technical fouls. And I'd come home and he'd look at me and he goes, son, you can't do that. And we'd sit and tell why you had to control your temper, control yourself, and so on and so forth. I remember, here's another tangent. I come home from a road trip, and both these people are passed away. My father's passed away, and Jerry Seaman, who was the official and then officiating supervisor for the NFL at the time, he would always, because we're not too far from New York where I live. And so Jerry Seaman, when he worked in the league office in New York for the NFL, would come down to visit my father to actually, because my dad was his mentor. And he would ask my dad, they would sit there and talk about officiating and so on. And I still remember the one time I had a pretty tough week on the road and probably was on SportsCenter more than I wanted to be. And so I come in the house, and of course then my dad and Jerry Seaman are sitting there, and my dad starts in about, yo, son, you can't do this, you lost your temper, blah, 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 he's going on. And I'm like the player, he's the coach. And I'm going, okay, yeah, coach, yeah, you're right, Dad, I know it, I'm learning. And all of a sudden Jerry Seaman interjects and he says, my dad's name was Stan. He goes, hey, Stan, the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. Wow. I sat there and said, thank you very much, Mr. Seaman. I appreciate it. That's just, I just had to throw that one in. But my dad was, like I said, I was so fortunate to have a father who officiated, football at the highest level, but he also officiated college basketball. He could give me a lot of advice. And then when I got to the NBA, I had so many guys who I, just like I said earlier, I just took from. And I watched, and I try to use things that they used that were successful. Sometimes they were successful with me, sometimes they weren't. Our main man, of course, and Dana knows this, and Nate, you probably do too, is Joe Crawford, who I knew I wouldn't have the success in my career if it wasn't for him. And to me, personally, I just think he is the greatest basketball official of all time that ever put on a jersey. And I truly believe he's forgotten more about officiating than most people know in their lifetime. Man is just amazing. And we would have so many wonderful conversations after games. When I was first hired, there was only 2 referees on the floor. So we would Joe and I would travel together and so on for like 2 years. He was my primary crew chief. And I was so lucky to have him as that primary crew chief and mentor. And Joe never pulled punches, as you guys know. There are times I walk in the locker room and I go like, well, I really wasn't too good there tonight. And he goes, well, at least you know you weren't. No, it wasn't like patting on the back. No, that's okay, Steve. No. But if you think about what he said, that was a learning moment there. If you have a bad game and you don't know you referee poorly, you're in a heap of trouble. You really are. You have to know when you're good and when you're not good. And if you can't decipher between the two, or don't care about the between the two, you're really not going to be reach the level of potential that you do have. So Joe was wonderful with me. Darryl Garrison, my boss who hired me, my first boss, he was like a father figure to me too, and he expected an awful lot out of me. He knew when to go to the whip and when not to go to the whip with me, about when to say, Steve, come on, let's go. You're not doing too well this past week or two, whatever it may be. Jack Madden was great, Jake O'Donnell. I mean, I could go down the list. Like I said, so many guys. And then there were guys that never knew that they were my mentors when I would watch them on the floor. I mean, Jess Kersey, the way he handled players, Jess never handed out too many technical fouls. But when a situation occurred and players and or coaches would approach Jess, all of a sudden they'd walk away laughing. And I go, Jess, what did you say to the guy? Well, he would tell me a few things in that southern drawl, and I knew that my Philly accent just wouldn't get the point across. So I couldn't use his tactics. But no, mentoring is so important. And then again, when you become that veteran or you become that crew chief, you have to be willing to impart that knowledge that other people have told you. And for what I've experienced in the NBA and my experience there are so many guys who have the experience that do want to impart that knowledge. And I encourage everybody who's listening to this podcast, especially, people have taught you things. Don't be afraid to share that with people. But at the same time, the people who are less experienced, being able to take that and listen to it. These people are just trying to help you because people help them. And with this craft of officiating, passing it forward, playing it forward, passing it along, and that's the way you get better.
I love what you said about the mentee aspect, because we talk all the time about being a good mentor and what that means, but there is some accountability, what we talked about earlier, on the part of the mentee to be good at listening and understand that if your mentor is hard on you, it's not personal. They want you to get better and they want you to learn, and sometimes it's tough love, and you have to understand that it is constructive. And I think that sometimes the mentee feels like it's just kind of a take relationship, but there has to be some give and take and some push and pull in that relationship. And I love that you started that answer with talking about the role of the mentee. It's critical in having an effective mentorship relationship. And then as you were naming people, you were just spewing out the names of officiating royalty, like in football, in basketball. It was amazing. I'm just like, holy cow, just kind of a trip down officiating memory lane. And I loved every minute of it.
And Dana, just to interject, a little bit more than, because when I was first, like I said, in the league, and it was spending a lot of time with Joey, after games, there was no other place I wanted to be than with Joe Crawford to talk about the game and to have him break down what I did wrong. I mean, that sometimes I just think that some younger guys maybe have something else on their mind and they want to, you know what, no, I can't come out tonight. I'm going to meet friends over here. Or I'm going to meet friends there. Well, to me, I wanted to be the best I possibly could in my profession, in my field. And that meant when I'm on the road doing my job, part of my job was after games, sitting down with the veteran and talking with them and asking them what they thought and watching film with them. And that's the only way that I could, get to the highest level of my career, my craft. One thing that Joe taught me too is with regard to a mentor can teach in so many different ways. And of course, Joe did teach me in so many different ways. And one thing I'll never forget, my first year, we're in Detroit. It's funny, we're talking, it's a two-man system. We're in Detroit. And unbeknownst to me, this is before, we had all these computers that you watch. This is when they would hand you like a VHS and you go back to the hotel room and ask for those big VCRs and watch the tapes that way. Unbeknownst to me, it was like my first week of my career, and my boss, Darryl Garrison, was at the game. And I'm going, after the game, Darryl comes to the locker room. I didn't know he was there, and I'm going to myself, boy. I said, here we go. We got to go back to the hotel, watch tape, and I'm just going to get torn apart. So we go back to the hotel. Darryl's there, and it's me and Joe Crawford. We put the tape in, and the first thing, Joe Crawford was running the machine. The first thing he did was start looking at his plays and saying, Darryl, look at that. I missed that one. Look, I'm out of position here. He starts bringing it all on himself. And here I am looking at this guy who I idolized as a referee, being objective with himself, admitting his mistakes, in front of a young referee. And of course, then here it is 40 years later. You can see what an impact it had on me. That here's this guy who is a finals referee mentoring me by admitting his mistakes, by being objective, and it was like he made me feel so comfortable that by the time it got to be Daryl pointing out my mistakes, it didn't matter because Joe had already admitted his mistakes. So there's a lot of things that mentors can do to make the younger guy or the mentee feel comfortable. And that's what Joe did for me.
That's
Yeah,
amazing.
it's that understanding of, hey, let me take the heat. I'm a little more secure. I'm a little more secure in my job right now. I'll take the heat and take a little off the mentee, and then we can get into it. And
Yeah.
so with mentorship, you are given a lot of pieces of information and things to help you become successful. But with that, how important is it to also self-talk, self-motivate, self-care, kind of the self stuff that you've taken, you've taken all the information from the mentor as a mentee. Now you also have to put that self work in.
There's a lot in that one statement in question you just said to me. There's a lot in there. Because what happens is that players and coaches, general managers, all these people, they put doubt in your mind. They always put self-doubt in your mind. And you have to fight that all the time. And it doesn't matter what year you're in, that self-doubt can creep in. The way you push it out is by, number one, knowing your rules, knowing your craft, but also watching a lot of film. And if you don't continue to watch film to see how good you are, how maybe not too good you are in certain games, then the self-doubt's going to creep in. During the course of the game, players will always question you. Now it's even more because it's the challenge, right? They twirl the finger, coaches challenge, and so on. I think that coaches are finally realizing the credibility of players is really low. There's no doubt about it. Early in the coaches challenge, I think last year it started, the year before, coaches were believing their players. Oh, I guess he didn't foul him, so yeah, we'll challenge. And they realized players don't even know when they foul. Obvious fouls that you and I and everybody in the world can see are obvious, and they're sitting there going like palms up, like I didn't touch the guy. Well, I think what happens is even before the coaches challenge, when I was on the floor, players would always, when you saw it was an obvious foul, go, hey Nate, I didn't foul the guy, I didn't touch him, and you're going to yourself, are you kidding me? And now if I don't go back and check that doubt's going to creep into my mind. Oh, that's always going to creep into my mind. The other thing, self-motivation. You do have to motivate yourself. There's no doubt because there's nobody else besides your partners or maybe your boss that's going to motivate you because they're all trying to drag you down. Nowadays you see it even in lower level sports of like 7-year-old, 8-year-old T-ball games. Just berating officials and so on. And it's really hard. So you've got to stick together in the officiating community. And I hate when you get crews together or people together and they go, oh, I don't get along with that guy. Well, guess what? For these, 48 minutes in the NBA game, we're going to be partners. I knew guys in the NBA that really couldn't stand each other. But when they went onto the court, they were partners. And they put all the feelings aside and so on because they know it's only within your own crew that you can, have a really good game and be the best partner you could be and try to bring out the best, in your crewmates. But, and a couple other things, Nate. The thing I talked to officiating community still here in Pennsylvania, and one question is funny: how can I get better? How do I get better and so on? And obviously, if I had a pill that I could sell people, I could make $1 million. Take this pill. But short of that, I think there's just a couple things that I mentioned, and we talked earlier about something keeping it simple. Number one, which we talked about already, is being objective with yourself. Being able to look at a tape or film, or even if you're not, if your partner said you missed the play, to admit the fact that you missed the play, but then find out why you missed the play. Why? Were you out of position? Was it out of your primary area? Which then, when it's out of your primary area in basketball, you better be throwing a strike. Because if you're guessing and it's on the corner, that's not what we want as a crew, right? And then the other thing I tell people, I say, I can improve your judgment by 20% tonight. And they look at me and go, what? Guess. Just don't guess. And people who never officiated are sitting there just going like, well, that's easy. People who've officiated go, no, it's not. Because there are many nights we sit there and go, I think that's the foul, and you put air in the whistle. Well, when you put air in the whistle, you're telling everybody that you saw a foul. And if I tell people that if you could stop guessing on plays, probably your percentage getting calls right are going to go up about 20%. And I know that just from my own experience. Plenty of times I didn't trust my partner. And I'm going, boy, that seems like a foul. And you put air in the whistle. Watch tape afterwards. And your partner's just looking at you, smiling, going, yeah, I had that angle too. So those two, there's accountability things of being objective, not guessing and stuff like that. I think that can really help.
That play calling stuff, it really hits close to home because I took some early season lumps with the boss and it was all stuff that I was guessing on. And go back to the tape and you watch, and sure enough, you're putting whistles where, one, you don't have an open look, you're guessing, you're not calling obvious fouls and violations. And, that's the only time she's calling is when you're guessing and you're calling out a primary. Well, if you just stick to the obvious in your primary, your call selection is going to go up. And so I had some lumps there early in the season. So as I'm listening to this, I'm like, oh man, this sounds really familiar.
Well, Nate, I've watched a few of your games. Only joking out.
I hope the ones that I was calling obvious
awesome.
fouls. Right, man.
I don't know. Given his reaction, I don't think it was. It's hilarious. And, I think it's funny because I'm kind of watching Nate's facial expressions and I can see Nate kind of thinking through what you're talking about going, yep, because it's just like a season in review almost. It's like, oh, yep, I definitely did that. But good thing is you adjusted, you listened, you applied it into your next games, and you've had a great season. So I think that's important to remember as well. And Steve, this next question, we've talked a little bit about it, but I want to do a little bit more of a dive. So there are so many things in officiating that are completely outside of the official's control. Fan behavior, technological advances, hiring, firing, and a myriad of other things. So what are some things, and you've talked about a little bit with regard to physical fitness and that, but what are some other things that each official has the ability solely and completely to control in their journey?
Yeah, Dana, and the things we were talking about already, when we think about it, these are simple things. I mean, I don't think anybody's talked differently in the years since I was hired in the NBA or CBA years ago in the 80s. And these are simple little things that we talk about. And it's funny how Nate goes, yeah, but we all experience it. We all mess up, but we all learn from it too. So there's nothing that's so like, oh my gosh, coming down the road that it's different than what we were talking about. It's the same old stuff. It's doing it well. It's thinking of the little things. But Dana, I would say, what can we control? I know I say this because when I talk to high school referees, they all want to get the playoffs, right? They all want to get the big game. They all want to go to state playoffs and so on and so forth. And there's things like you said, Dana, you can't control. All you can do is be the best official you can possibly be. And that's number one. And I'm repeating it again because my dad would drill it into me. Know your rules. And for any sport that's out there, whether it be football, basketball, baseball, hockey, it's so true. If you think about this, if it came down to two officials, and I know, Dana, it came down to you at times when you were, in New Mexico, and you had two officials that you were going to be like the third official in the game in the playoff game. And you look and you say, there's no doubt, if the other two guys didn't know the rules that well, who knows the rules the best? Well, this guy does. I'm putting them on the game. It's something you can control. And it's even in the NBA level, too. The NBA, the supervisors and so on, they know the officials who know the rules. And if they don't have a rules guy on that one crew in a playoff game, they're going to put one on there. So number one, you can create instant credibility and moving up the ladder by knowing the rules better than anybody else. You said about your physical conditioning. That's for sure. Here's another one. And I learned this the hard way, Nate. This is a high school one. And I still remember the high school gym I was in and the official I was working with. And the guy was one of the best high school officials in the area. And I was like young guy, like early 20s, cocky at the time, thinking I'm pretty cool. Little did I know how much I didn't know, right? And his game by halftime was like a 25-point blowout. We get in the line out. Of course, I go in the locker room and I sit down and he looked at me and says, "Don't you ever do this again." And I'm like, "What are you talking about?" And he says, "You weren't hustling out there." He said, "You were lazy out there in the first half." He said, "I don't want to ever see you do that again." And I'm like, I was taken back by it. Again, here I am 50 years later almost, never forgetting that, and I never did. That's something you can control. That's something I look at when I go to these different high school tournaments. I've seen guys literally walking up and down the floor, and I want to go rip the shirt off because not only are they doing a disservice to themselves, but they're doing a disservice to the officiating community. And that's even more when you don't hustle, when you don't know your rules, when you aren't a good partner, when you're talking to people in the stands, you're not just doing a disservice to yourself, you're doing a disservice to your partners and the refereeing community because now everybody's thinking all referees are that way. So I just think there's so many things that you can control, and a couple of things I just mentioned there of just being professional when you're out there. I mean, when you're talking to coaches and players, no matter what level you're at, you treat them professionally, even if they're treating you unprofessionally, because we have a way of, treating that, of course, with a technical foul in basketball. There's no doubt baseball and injection, but you hold yourself to the highest standard. And when you hold yourself to the highest standards, I think that's great for yourself and also for the officiating community.
Steve, your answer just got me super fired up because that is such a just poignant observation, statement, what have you. When you go out there and represent officiating poorly, that is like my number one pet peeve. When you see somebody who, they look like they'd rather have a root canal than officiate the game that they're working, everybody sees that. And you're not just a reflection of Steve, the official, you're a reflection of every single person who wears the stripes. And I think that people forget about that pride in the stripes and the pride in that profession or avocation. And even if you're doing a middle school game or a youth game, that same standard should be applied at all levels. And I think that it is something that you can control. You can control your comportment and your personality. And if you look happy or sad or mad when you're working a game. And I think that, that's critical. And that was always something back in New Mexico. Nate probably heard me say it more than he wanted to officials who would call, and they were so concerned about everybody else's schedule. And why did he get those games and she got those games and I only got this? And it was always, you can't control anybody else's schedule. You can ask questions as far as what are they doing to get there? But don't worry about what everybody else has. Worry about what you have. Worry about the game in front of you. Worry about your trajectory and stop worrying about everybody else's. And I think that issue of what we can control, you can control yourself. That's it. Can't control anything else. And your answer got me all pumped up, but it was something that needs to be said about that representation of the bigger officiating community. And it's a trickle down, it's a trickle up. There's a little bit of that regardless of what level you work at. It affects the perception of officials at every other level. So I really appreciate you bringing that up.
Well, thanks, Dana. I guess I can just expound on that point. And this really wasn't part of when I was in the league or so, but now because of social media, you really have to be able to control yourself off the floor too, or off the field. There are plenty of people out there who would love to send this little picture of this umpire, referee, whatever, who got drunk or who handled, maybe got angry with somebody in the store or something like that, and they want to put all over social media. I mean, it never was really that way when I was coming up. But now it's prevalent now when people have cameras on the phones and they're, recording everything. We as officials are in the public eye, whether you're high school, college, professional. People are wanting to take a video of you and say, hey, look what Steve Javie did. Look how he's acting off the floor. All of a sudden that becomes part of who you are. So you have to be careful there.
There's eyes everywhere. You're exactly right.
Well, yep. And now that Dana is super excited and pumped, we always finish our podcasts every week with something that educates, elevates, and excites our listeners. What can you tell us about officiating that achieves that mission?
Well, there's 3 E's, right? The 3 E's.
3 E's.
Yeah, to educate. The education would be to maybe educate people and even maybe other officials who are starting out that officiating is more than just play calling. We think about officiating, and most people think, I call it video officiating. You put a quarter in the machine, you go, is that a foul or not a foul? A penalty or not a penalty? Well, you know what? There's a lot more to that, to officiating, than just calling the plays. And I'll just speak for basketball alone. Basketball, it's knowing the players on the floor, right? It's knowing, at the NBA level, at the high college level, and so on, and maybe even at the high school level, but mainly makes it college and pro, is knowing the situations in the game, knowing maybe the 2 teams, have they had past games where things just didn't go well. When you get in the course of the game, knowing the time, knowing the score, and knowing how to call the game. Is the game starting out early? Is it too physical? Well, you know what? It's hard to get a game back when you've let it go far in the beginning. If you start calling it tight in the beginning, you can always let it go at the end. So there's a lot more to it. And I know when people said when I retired, what do you miss? I said, I miss the challenge, the mental challenge of it. I remember another story. I remember coming up, I was a crew chief. I was in the final for about 3 or 4 years when this thought came to my mind. It was in the LA Clippers old arena. Danny Manning was playing for the Clippers back then. That's how far back we're going. And I remember going up and down the floor saying to myself, I'm finally starting to get it. And that was my 13th or 14th year. And I'm saying to myself, I'm finally, because I'm looking at the matchup. This matchup's a tough one. This one, I see a sub coming to the table and I'm saying, aggressive guy, be careful when he comes in. So all these things encompass officiating, not just foul or no foul. So I just want to educate officials, but also educate people who are not officiating that there's a lot more to officiating than what meets the eye. And that's the challenging part, to elevate. I always thought that being objective is to elevate your game, as we talked about before. I think being objective, you have to be able to elevate your game that way, control the things that you can control. So I think we talked about that, a little bit there, about elevating your thing, about not guessing. Nate, you talked about that. So I think for officiating, to elevate that, and also I think to elevate yourself within your community, officiating community, is not just to look out for yourself, but look out for your partners on the floor. Not everybody needs to know that you're the crew chief on the floor, right? I mean, because we have so many guys you watch in a college or pro game, and you go, yeah, he's the crew chief. He's running around with the basketball. I'll throw the jump ball. I'll do this. Well, guess what? That doesn't mean crap, because if your two partners are looking at you the same way I'm looking at you, you're not going to have a great crew. I would always try to make my partners better, okay? And if my job as a crew chief was to make each one of my partners the best official they can be that night, then I know my crew's going to have a great game. So I think that can elevate yourself, and your crew. And then exciting. What can excite? I really believe that in my career, first of all, I was just so blessed to make a living in professional sports. I mean, I was a kid, I was a sports junkie, still love sports, and I made a living and continue to make a living in professional sports. That's exciting. For a guy who wanted to be a ball player, you know what? I always say, God had different plans, and I like his plan a lot better than mine. There's no doubt about it. And I think it's an exciting thing. I see my buddies who, salesmen or this, and they're very successful, and, Monday comes around and I got to go to work. I never had a Monday morning. Every night was a Friday night for me. It was just so much fun. If I had a chance to do it all over again, I would do it all over again. It's an exciting career. If somebody out there is listening, maybe is a player and maybe doesn't make it like I didn't make it and you wanted to, and that was your dream and your goal, you know what? When one door closes, another door opens. And I'll tell you one thing, standing there, I still remember standing there with Darryl Garrison and Bob Delaney in Madison Square Garden right before a playoff game with the Knicks. Darryl Garrison looked at us and said, how about this feeling? And I said, it doesn't get any better. So it's an exciting career. It's an exciting, avocation at the same time. So I encourage anybody who's into sports, younger people, guess what? The same feeling you get those butterflies before you play a game, exact same feeling you get before you officiate. So that's the exciting part about it.
Well, I think that worked because I got goosebumps. So that was definitely exciting. That Madison Square Garden. So, Steve Javie, thank you so much. True legend of basketball refereeing, of officiating in general, a great ambassador for the officiating community, and someone who's given back to NASO, to the NBA, all of the different things that you're involved with, and of course with your community and through the Catholic Church and everything that you're doing there. I mean, you're an incredible human being and a great friend and somebody that we all are better through knowing you. So thank you so much for your time on this podcast and for everything you've done for me, for Nate during our careers. You're absolutely wonderful, and we're so honored to have you on. Thank you for joining us.
Well, Dana, thanks for having me. Nate, thanks for having me. And of course, I can't leave without giving a shout out to my man, Ed, my BFF.
Your BFF, he is. He loves that, by the way.
Great to see you guys. Thanks for having me on.
All right. Thank you for joining us from the A to Zebra podcast. Don't forget to check us out on Facebook, Instagram, and X for more information about the show. See you next time.
Be sure to hit that like button, follow, subscribe, and also catch From A to Zebra on Instagram at from_A_2_zebra, Facebook, From A to Zebra podcast, and on X at From A to Zebra.